Might get a couple more people join us. We'll see. So here we go. There's another one. So this session will be about 45 minutes, and it's really an opportunity for you guys to ask some questions about climate action and what you can do in your homes and things like that. So Crew, we're a community benefit society. So we're a not-for-profit entity, and we're a bit like a cooperative, really, I guess is a good way of thinking of us. So we've got a lot of voluntary members, and we do a couple of things. We do sort of advisory work in terms of sustainability. So we'll work with lots of third sector organizations on things like solar PV, heat pumps, smart heating controls, a whole range of products like that. And we're increasing now trying to work with the domestic market as well. So one of the products we're starting to offer is a home carbon audit. So if you want to understand more about what you can do in your home, then someone can come to your house, do an audit, and they would then offer you sort of a whole load of spreadsheets that show you sort of paybacks on solar PV, on heat pumps, on smart heating controls, LED lighting, stuff like that. So, and we're going to we're trying to do more and more of this stuff with the local community. So webinars, watch parties, things like that, just to help people understand more of what's available and what they could be doing. And we also have a community outreach arm. So yesterday I was in a school and we were playing a whole set of eco action games with some year 4 children to help them start thinking about the things they can do in their homes and things they can do in their school. A lot of that's about behavioral change type stuff, which is really kind of nice. And they have good fun. We also have a helpline. So if people are struggling with their fuel bills, we can help them with things like fuel switching, energy advice. We can then refer them for home visits and look at what we could be doing, things like draft excluders, flashbacks, maybe a few LED light bulbs. So we have some funding for that as well. So there's 2 parts to what Crew do, and clearly this bit is focused on greening your home and those kind of measures. So what I'll do is I'll just put up a slide now, and we can decide whether we want to run through the presentation or whether we just want to ask some questions. It's up to you guys, really. But I'll start with this slide. Here we go. Is everyone seeing that? Not yet, are they?
Yeah, I see it now.
Yeah, great. That took a little longer than normal. So essentially, Crew, with respect to home, householders, really, we're looking at probably 4 areas where we feel we can help, which is the home carbon audit I've just mentioned. I think we're just about to launch a heat pump business, purely from the fact that everyone kept coming to say we can't find any heat pump installers. Can you help? And we kept referring to people, and the guys that we were recommending then weren't getting back to them just because everyone's just so incredibly busy. So we've ended up sort of deciding we're going to set up our own heat pump business, and how we're going to do that is we're going to work with local plumbing firms. So we've chosen Switched On from that perspective, get them on the heat pump course. Then we're working with a company down in Goring-on-Sea who will do the design work of the heat pumps and then accredit it so that you get your subsidy, be that the RHI or be it the Clean Homes grant that's coming after the RHI. And then what we will do is things like the home assessment work, the heat loss calcs and all those kind of things, and we'll just coordinate the whole process really. So it will give people an option for installing their own heat pumps. And the big advantage of, I think, working with us on it is we've done quite a lot of work now on the type of heat pumps that will fit into homes in Southwest London, which, when we're dealing with terrace housing that's only about 4.5, 5 meters wide, someone recommended a heat pump that is 1.5 meters long, and you've got to be a meter away from the curtilage, the boundary line either side your house. It's pretty tough. And these things are big, huge, and quite noisy. So we're trying to find solutions that will work better than that. And some of them will be straight heat pumps, and some of them will be a hybrid solution where you'll have a new gas boiler that will do your hot water. And this heat pump will be much smaller, but it will probably do around about 80% of your heating needs. So it's kind of a halfway house, really, migrating from gas to heat pumps. But I think it might be a solution that works for the typical sort of Victorian terrace houses that we have. So if it gets really, really cold, your gas boiler will kick in and provide the heat that you need. But most of the time, particularly in London, where we never really get that cold very often, we could see the heat pump doing stuff. So that's the reason we've launched this, really. We were just looking at what was offering, and the service was really poor. The products they were offering were these huge, great units that wouldn't work in London, and we just thought, actually, we can probably do this better. So that's what we're looking to do. If anyone needs help with energy savings advice, we have a helpline. We also run cafes across the borough, and that's for people who are really struggling with their bills, but it's also for people who just would like some energy advice, really. So you can come along. We've got one at Tooting Library on Friday as part of the COP sessions with the council, and that's 9:30 to 12:30, I think. So if you're in the area and want to pop in, you can meet some of our trained energy advisors, and they can help. So that would be great, and that works for everybody. Whether you own your own home, whether you're renting a home, we can kind of help you with some of that advice. And the other area I think we can be fairly helpful on is kind of introducing new technologies and kind of explaining how they work. So we're working with one product at the moment that most of you, or probably all of you, have never heard of, which is a heat transfer solution called Hydromix. You put it in your radiators and it makes your heating 25%-ish more efficient. With rising gas prices at the moment, that's kind of a very interesting product. And then things like heat zoning, so using smart thermostats to kind of not heat your whole house at the same time, but heat rooms when you need to. And then smart things like energy shifting, so how you can actually use maybe time of use tariffs, which are coming. So people like Octopus have a agile tariff, so that you actually pay less energy if you avoid peak periods. Peak periods tend to be 4 till 7-ish, 4:30, 7:30. If you can avoid those periods, then you might be paying half the price for your electricity that you would do if you were using just 24 hours of their service, really. So that's what we do in a nutshell. No, quite a big nutshell. That's quite a lot of explanation. So just wondering from you guys, what would you like out of the session? Is there any particular products you want to go through, ask questions on? Would you like me just to present our essentially a truncated version of a hung carbon audit? So starting point would be this might be your current consumption, and what we're saying is you're currently consuming 4.14 tons. With certain measures you could get that down to below half a ton. I can run through that, or if you would prefer to make it more interactive, then we can do that too. Any opinions on that?
I've got my hand up. I don't know if you can see it.
No, I can't now because I've got this running. So I'll stop this and I'll be able to see. So okay. Yes, how can I help?
I've read quite a bit about heat pumps, but living in a Victorian terraced house from 1873, I've also read that the heat loss through the walls, which are not cavity walls, the heat loss from houses like mine is so big that actually it's not worth thinking about a heat pump yet. The first thing we need to do is insulate them. But I'm in a conservation area, so I can't put cladding on the outside. And the idea of trying to put cladding on the inside of my small rooms, which have coving and all sorts of things like that, it just fills me with horror.
Yeah, Debbie, I mean, it's a reoccurring question, and it's a very, very, very good question. What I'd say is that, one, you're a terrace house, so you are at least half insulated because you're insulated either side. The houses next to you will act as insulation, because there's lots of air there that they're heating up as well. So you're only losing heat through the front and back. So if you have reasonably decent windows, if you've got sash windows that have been double glazed, for instance, then that's a big part of your heat loss anyway at the front of the front of the back of the house. So there's not, if you think about it, there's not a lot of brickwork typically at the front and back. Heat pumps will work. What will have to happen is you'll have to have a heat loss calc assessment, and they'll have to work out whether they have to make your radiator bigger. Because all we're talking about here is with heat pumps is you're running a slightly lower flow temperature. So traditionally with our gas boilers, we've run them at say 75 degrees, right? So the heat comes out at 75 and it returns about 60. If we're looking at modern condensing boilers, just letting a couple of people in. Hi there, Annie. If you look at modern condensing boilers, those kind of things should be running at around about 60-degree flow temperature, because they need to return at 50 degrees to go in condensing mode. Otherwise, they're not 95% efficient. They're only around about 75% efficient if they don't hit that condensing mode. So we're not talking about a huge difference here, because heat pumps can run between 45 and 55 degrees typically, unless you have underfloor heating throughout your house. Then you can run them at a lower temperature, like at 35 to 40 degrees. So the step from a condensing boiler to a heat pump is not huge. So all we've got to do is create a bit more surface area. So you replace radiators, and this typically won't be in your bedrooms because they tend to be oversized already. So it might be only 2 or 3 rooms where you need to put maybe a double radiator in, whether it's a single or a triple where there was a double. The next bit of it really comes down to running costs. So if we think about the running costs of the heat pump, 2 things impact a heat pump: the outside temperature. So the colder it gets, the less efficient it becomes. And it's generally pretty okay down to around about -2. It's from -2 onwards that you start to lose efficiency. And the other part is the temperature you're heating at. So if you heat it at 55 degrees, a heat pump might be 325% efficient. If you heat it at 35 degrees, it might be 425% efficient. But at the moment, if we look at our houses and if we use old prices, because the market's gone completely crazy, but if you got 325% efficient heat pump and you got an 85% efficient boiler, which is probably what our boilers are, at the summer pricing, which was 14.3p was the national average and 3.8p was the gas national average, you were kind of washing your face. There wasn't a lot of difference in your running costs. Now that does assume that your heat pump will remain at 325% efficient, but in London we're not often going down below -2. It doesn't happen. You know, last February, I was looking at last Feb's temperatures because, well, that's as cold as I can remember it. It snowed on 4 separate occasions that month. And when I looked at the average temperature for the month, it was 6.5 degrees. And that's including the low nighttime temperatures. Now, you're not going to be running your heat pump at 3, 4, 5 in the morning. The temperature rises quite a bit once the sun comes up. So it's not very often that your heat pump's going to struggle. So when people say you can't do this, it's really about running costs rather than its ability to perform. So if we look at the most standard unit in the UK, the Mitsubishi EcoDan, that's a 14 kilowatt unit. That is rated at 14 kilowatts, whether it's 7 degrees or -7, and it will work down to -24. So in London, you're getting down to -7. This thing will still deliver you 14 kilowatts of heat, for instance, or 18 kilowatts of heat, depending on the unit you choose. So you don't need to worry about, will it get hot enough? It will produce the heat that it says it will produce. The bit that you need to be concerned about is comfort, and the comfort being, okay, I may need slightly bigger radiators. And there's a couple of ways of addressing that. One is the bigger radiators. The other one is the product we were talking about before, Hydromix. Hydromix has an ability to take more heat off of the heat exchanger and get it to a room faster and then dump it. So when we looked at a social housing trial of gas boilers, this was, what we found was that homes with Hydromix in got to temperature within 9 minutes, compared with ones with water that got to Andrew's dog is amusing me. Sorry. No, it's fine. Got to temperature in 22 minutes. So it was 2.4 times faster to get to that temperature. It also retained heat. So what we found with Hydromix was that actually an hour and a half later, the heat was still in the building. It was still pretty much the same temperature. Whereas in the control house, it had lost, I think, 4 degrees. The Hydromix can kind of help with that comfort level. It will get the building up to the temperature you need faster, and that's important when you're running at those low flow temperatures. So when you're thinking, Debbie, about well, it won't work in my property. It will. It's just, are you worried about actually the running costs becoming more expensive? Now, a point to consider here, or 3 points to consider here really are: one, the government has already announced that it's moving its climate change levy from electricity to gas. So that's 0.1 pence a year will be moving for the next 3 years, will be moving across to gas. The second part is, which they did leak to the FT about 3 weekends ago, and then panicked because of the gas prices. They're going to move the legacy that's on electricity, which is about 0.8 pence, from electricity to gas. Now, when you've got let's use the old numbers, the 14, we know they're now 20 something pence and 5 pence for gas. But, if you're moving from 14p, you're taking a penny off of it. Okay, it's nice, but it's not a big help. If you're adding that onto a 4p tariff and making it a 5p tariff, that is a huge, huge cost. So I've modeled over a 10-year period, assuming that they start moving this from I think I based it from 2023 onwards to 2030. You have 0.1% inflation, and you have this 0.8p slowly being trickled in. When we were talking about that 325% efficiency against 85, washing your face today, you'd be losing £350 by having your gas boiler compared with a heat pump. So even if this thing doesn't run at 325% efficiency, you're going to have that to play with over the next several years. They will start taxing gas a whole lot more. They're going to have to, right? They need to make that incentive. So they're going to have to tax the gas steadily but surely over time. The second bit is you pay £92 a year is now the current average for the new price fix, the standard variable tariff. You pay £92 a year to have your gas contract. So you can say, okay, that's a saving. I don't need gas anymore. I've got a heat pump. I'll get myself an induction hob. Unless you've got a pacemaker, then you'll get those terrible ceramic ones. Someone raised that issue in one of my meetings recently, which is a fair point. It's true. You can't have an induction hob if you've got a pacemaker. But you get, that's another £92 that you can say goes towards my heat pump not being 325% efficient. Then the next factor is that gas boilers are not very reliable, as we all know. So numbers from which are that the average householder who has a gas contract with British Gas, HomeServe, pays £280 a year, which is pretty much half of what they're paying for their gas bills on top to make sure their gas boiler works. Which also had some other interesting stats, which I thought were really, really interesting, was if you get your boiler serviced every year, there's a probability of breaking down of 32% within the first 6 years. If you get your boiler serviced every 1 to 2 years, I think the number was, it's got a 64% of breaking down within the first 6 years. So you're always having to deal with that. And heat pumps don't break down. A heat pump is essentially the same as your fridge, right? It's just compressors and refrigerant. It's just in reverse. If you're the back of your fridge, those grates will be really, really warm. That's the heat pump part of it. The bit that you're feeling in your fridge is actually what the heat pump chucks out outside the house, right? It's sending 0 degrees or 2 degrees cold out into the atmosphere while it's sucking warm air in from the broader atmosphere. So that's the other thing to think about here is your maintenance costs on gas. So when you start adding all that together, it comes to around about £700. So you've got quite a lot to play with on this if you're not going to get 325% efficiency. So my view is I think you can go for a heat pump, spend whatever it would cost, £200-300 on having some heat loss calcs done. See if it's viable. You may be in just such a leaky house that it doesn't work. But if you've got decent windows, if you've got a decent fitting door, if you are mid-terrace, so you're insulated either side, the probability is you'll be fine, and you will be able to have a heat pump. And then it really is just about those running costs. So I hope that was helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Annalise.
Hi. Thanks, really helpful. That's loads of info, Toby. But it's great, and also like very reassuring for I think a lot of people who live in that sort of housing. Just picking up on a couple of those points. Obviously, especially if you've got big windows, there's very little wall insulation that you can do anyway on a kind of Victorian terraced house. But there's certainly stuff that we can do in the roof, isn't there? So what kind of impact does just adding that extra bit of roof insulation in have? And like, is that definitely worth doing if you think about getting a heat pump? And the other question I had about heat pumps was about their sort of positioning. And, you get these kind of returns on a lot of Victorian terraces where you have your kitchen or extension section out the back kind of juts out, and you're left with this sort of yard space where you might put a heat pump. But I know there might be some kind of planning considerations around their proximity to neighbouring houses. Like, how do you guys deal with that? Because I know it's been an issue in the past.
Yeah, both good points. And yeah, thanks for reminding me on the loft insulation. So part of if you're going for RHI, and we don't know what the rules are going to be on post RHI at the moment, because government and stuff are not really up to speed on all this, he says diplomatically. But loft insulation, if you have a cavity, you have to fill it. If you don't have substantial loft insulation, you will have to improve it to be able to get RHI. And I assume they will do the same thing with the Clean Homes grant as well. So the current recommendation is 275 mil of loft insulation. And the good thing about that is it's a relatively inexpensive measure. It's a few £100s to put loft insulation in. And remember, you lose around about 25%. I've got a slide here so I can actually get the right number. 25% through your roof. So actually, by putting that in, great, you're doing that. I mean, most of us have done that. The issue for a lot of us living in Southwest London, we've probably all got mansards. We've all gone into the roof, but they're relatively recent, so they should have decent insulation in that part of the roof anyway when the conversion was being done. So you should hit the regs that you need to for that component of it. And then with respect to placement, the side return doesn't really work because it's almost likely to be within a meter of your border. So your options are really going to be towards the back of the garden and slightly a meter away from the fence. Though I think you might be able to go against the fence because you're far enough away from the person's house that you can go against the fence. We're looking at a unit. Let me just see if I can find the brochure quickly. So this is the hybrid unit that we were talking about, Dakin. So you've got a gas boiler here, and then this unit, and it's pretty small. So a normal heat pump might be somewhere between like a meter 20 by a meter by about 500. This one is 750 by 500 by 350. The other thing is a normal one where we might fall down, even if you're happy to have it in your garden, sound might be an issue. So we have to do a sound test as part of the MCS accreditation to make sure that it's below background noise levels. Now, these things are around about 50, 51 decibels, which everyone gets very worked up about, but your gas boiler is 55, 60, it's in your house. These things are outside. So it seems slightly odd that, and I think over time, planners will probably just accept that this is just general background noise. This particular unit is only 39 decibels on the unit. So a couple of meters away, and you're probably at 30-ish decibels, which is around about whisper quiet. So it is very, very quiet. Something like this could go on a flat roof. It's small enough just to tuck pretty much anywhere. It doesn't sound that different, 750 to 1.25. It really is. I mean, when you're in a room with them, you see them in the showroom, this feels small compared with a normal heat pump. So I think we would, in terrace housing, I think we'll be looking at units like this. This works really well with blocks of flats as well. And the reason being that you don't obviously have to have a hot water tank. So when you have a heat pump, you have to have a hot water tank. So the house, sometimes it's heating the house, sometimes it's filling up your hot water tank. Because you've still got a gas boiler, you've got instantaneous hot water. So you're fine on that front. You don't need that. So it's less upheaval in your house. If you're in a flat, you haven't got to find that space for it, which you probably don't have in a flat. And the great thing is this unit can then just sit on the side of a wall like an air conditioning unit would in a flat. Now, no offense to Wandsworth Council, because it's the same with all the councils. Planners are quite a long way behind on thinking on this stuff. And we've been pushing them with a couple of leaseholders of flats where the council own the freehold to try and make a decision. They've got some Green Homes grant and they're really struggling with it. And it's not easy, you know, they're not easy decisions. And we, you know, the curtilage rules and stuff like that. But you could quite easily put this heat pump in and say, well, technically it is a metre away from the curtilage because it's a metre off the ground. And the next floor above me is 1.5 meters away. So, you know, I'm within planning regs. But they are looking into it, and we've got to the point where the planning team are reviewing this and they're thinking about it. So we will have an answer soon. But I think something like this, where you could actually have your boiler is here and you've got your gas flue, you just bolt the heat pump behind the gas boiler outside, and this thing will be such an easy install. So I think these are good solutions for now. You know, it's not what we want. We want to be 100% renewable, but this will probably be 60% renewable. So it's a good place to start, and it will work until technology catches up and miniaturizes and, you know, gets quieter and all those kind of things. Once people start thinking about heat pumps in inner cities rather than heat pumps in big Surrey gardens, which is kind of what this has been devised for so far. So so placement is an issue, but I think flat roofs, back of the garden are probably 2 options. And it's not that much money actually to trench a few meters. And typically our gardens are all pretty small anyway. We're only going to be going 4, 5, 6 meters or something. So to get it away and out of sort of the house really. So that's a few, couple £100 a meter or something like that. So it's not adding a huge amount to the cost to be able to do that. So I think there are ways that we can address those issues. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask about any technologies or anything they've been thinking about, or how Crew might be able to help? Angela.
Hi. Yes. So I live in a council flat. I own it, but it's a Wandsworth council, and we have had confirmation that finally windows are going to be replaced in August 2023. 2023. Mm-hmm. We have been waiting for a long time because at the moment we have metal frame windows. So I'm part of the committee of the Residents Association. It's a big estate, but it's like 250 properties. Many of those properties are at risk of fuel poverty. So we want to get this right. We want to get the windows right to make sure that we go for the best option and even consider wall insulation. Would it be an option to use one of the properties, since most of the properties are the same, one of the flats, to have one of the carbon assessments with you, to pay for one of those? Would that be a good option to consider different options before Wandsworth make decisions and consultations?
Yeah, I think it could be. I mean, the main issue there is then working with Wandsworth to look at the measures that will be suitable. I mean, it's difficult in flats in that, how do you share a roof for solar PV? So we've had these conversations with the planners already. Where would you put heat pumps? So do you have a shared system? The issue there with a shared system is the government subsidy isn't there, because that becomes a commercial install rather than a domestic install. But do we really want 25 heat pumps bolted on the side of a building? So the government's kind of got to get to. We wrote to the government about this a while ago, sort of saying what you should be doing here is, if it's like a shared freehold type scenario, for instance, why are you treating those people differently to single dwellers? It's just a reality of a lot of people's lives, and you should be offering them the same tariff. Because we worked out, we were looking at a project down at Merton Abbey Mills. The blocks of flats down there, if anyone's ever been to Merton Abbey Mills, the flat's right there on the river, and it's 52 flats, I think it was. Now, if we had to install individual heat pumps, they would need 300 kilowatt hours of heat. And they've got a river, and we can use that river. That river, you know, will never get below, say, 6 degrees in the winter. So that was a huge opportunity, a huge asset. And we worked out whether we could have collectors and then have 2 heat pumps, which would only be about, I think it was about 120 or 130 kilowatts was enough for the building. We're doing this massive oversizing if we all do them individually, which then creates more pressure on the grid. You know, there's just so many knock-on effects. It's obviously much more expensive an installation doing 52 individual runs rather than 2 big heat pumps and then just piping it through the system. And other factors like, you know, having a shared hot water system. So you could have big buffer tanks in the garage there that we were looking at, so that you would need then less water, hot water, because not everyone's using their hot water at the same time. That would free up a cupboard for them in their house, which is important because they're not the biggest flats. They're very cool looking flats, but not the biggest flats. So there's just so many, and we put all this to the government, and the government just said, no, these are the rules. So so you are limited. You know, I think what we need to do is get Wandsworth, for instance, thinking about how can you share a roof in terms of solar PV? Could people have a percentage of the roof that's theirs, so they put PV on? You know, how are we going to put heat into these buildings? Is it going to be shared ground arrays, which are very big investments? If we look at, you know, we can install a heat pump. This system typically will go in at 10, 11,000. You might pay for a standard monoblock system around about £12,000, say, is what we're trying to target at the moment. When Enfield Council puts shared ground arrays into blocks of flats using a pretty rubbish heat pump, in my opinion, which is Kendra, it's not very efficient heat pump. Those installs cost £16,500 per flat. And the amount of heat they're providing, you know, this is a tiny little Kendra shoebox, which I think is a 3 kilowatt unit. You know, the units we're describing here, this is 4 kilowatts plus the gas boiler. The 12,000 one would be a 14 kilowatt unit. It's providing a lot more heat. These things are tiny and they're incredibly expensive, but it's because the ground system costs so much to do. So it's tough. I think if you're in flats, the things you should be thinking about are making sure you've got LED lights through the whole building, your whole flat. Looking at maybe having smart heating thermostats, you know, the 1 to 6 TRVs. You can get smart versions you can programming those into your bedrooms, so that you're not heating your bedrooms from 5 o'clock. You're only heating spaces that you're using from 5 o'clock, and then those will kick in at, say, 8 or 9, an hour or 2 before you go to bed. Angela, you sound Spanish, so I'm going to say 2 or 3 in the morning, so at 4 when you go to bed. But you can just zone it. And if you think about that in terms of your space, you know, let's say you've got a 2-bedroom flat, you might be heating two rooms, which might be, say, 30 or 40% of the space for 4 or 5 hours every day that you don't need to. You know, in bigger houses, you might have a scenario where you've got, you know, I don't know, two lounges. You're never using that lounge in the morning. That's for, you know, so why are you heating it in the morning? So zoning those spaces is important. So I think you can look at that. Product like Hydromix works very well in flats as well as houses. It does the same thing. It will create the heat faster. It will hold heat in the building better, and it will make your boiler more efficient. So that's a product that can work, and yeah, it is roughly half the cost to install it in a flat as it is. So we've installed 5 properties recently, and it was pretty much half the cost to install in a flat as it was to install in a house. So it kind of works well. And then a smart thermostat, and how a smart thermostat works really is, if you have busy lifestyles and you know you're going to be home late, you can kind of program it and say, right, I don't need the heating come on at 5 tonight, I need to come on at 8 because I won't be home to 10. But the other bit is they have weather compensation, and what that's doing is it knows the outside temperature, and therefore it will heat the room to what, or your thermostat to what you've requested, knowing the algorithm. So let's say it's -2 outside, it will take 2 hours to heat your flat. Okay, it will come on. But when you've got weather like this in November, rather than having it at the worst case scenario, which is what we do now, we have it programmed, right, I want my house to be warm at 7 o'clock, so the heating's coming on at 5. It's 13 degrees this morning, so actually it only needed half an hour to be there. And that's what the weather compensation does. It says, okay, I'm only going to start heating the building now half an hour before. So you're shaving off, an hour a day here and there with the smart thermostats. And again, those things are relatively inexpensive. It's like £250 to have those installed, but they will make a big difference. And the payback on all this stuff is obviously massively fallen away because our prices are going up. We were paying 3.8 pence. We're now paying 4.75 pence. The view is that in April, if we get to April, there's a lot of pressure from all these failing utilities, put pressure on the government to say, right, we need another break in December. But they're talking about a 30% increase on that. So that's what, another 1.2, another 1.5 pence. We could be paying over 6 pence for our gas soon. It's just terrifying what impact that's going to have on people. So it'd be really important to look at these measures, because these measures that might pay back in 4 years will now pay back in 2 years. And they're not that big an investment really in the scheme of things compared with windows and insulation and solar PV and heat pumps. So I think looking at the smaller measures first and seeing what you can afford, and in flats, they'll work just as well. Smart thermostats, smart TRVs, Hydromix, they will work. And those 3 products, you can probably get them installed in your house for £1,000, and they will halve your heating bill, would be my guess, those 3 measures. So, and that will be quite a lot of money come April. It's quite a lot of money. It's a lot of money now, but it's going to be a whole lot more money come April. So I think you look at those smaller things, and that's how you get to do what you do. But happily, I mean, in that scenario, Angela, I mean, maybe we can come out and have a look anyway for you, and just if we could maybe work with Annalise and Bethany on this as just a general project, it could be something that we could do, and just think about how we're going to solve these issues.
Yeah, no, that would be great, because it's about 250 flats, and it's going to be a big project, many windows and many changes that we would like to make, but we want to make the right changes. And with the council, normally what it works, they just go for probably a cost-effective supplier, but it's not always the best quality, and it's going to be a lot of money, especially for a lot of people who don't have a lot of money. So at least just having the best quality that we can get.
Well, we've got Bethany and Annalise here, who are part of the eco team. So I mean, guys, on that question, I assume now you guys are thinking about your 2030 standards and 2050 standards. So have you got a comment on what windows would be going in there?
Yeah, so we will be obviously looking at how we can make our own council housing compliant with our targets, and that will be trying to look at it in the round, and also if we're already going in where to do something, then what else can we do at the same time to add on to that, specifically like the windows themselves. I'm not kind of the technical side of things, it's more the policy side, but yeah, we would certainly be looking to be consistent with that target. What I would say is feel free to email us. Angela will put our email addresses in the chat, and we can definitely talk about it.
Just a question like Bethany, how does the council view the 17,000 of housing stock? Because if we look at the climate emergency paper, I think you say you're responsible for 5% emissions. That's clearly not including the 17,000 of properties you own then, is it? Yeah. It still is.
So the emissions that are attributable to our Scope 1 and Scope 2 direct emissions, so that's rather than our indirect emissions, include our housing stock. What we can't measure, obviously, is what if we have like individual gas boilers, for example, we don't currently see what each individual household is doing. So it covers the emissions that are associated with the energy use that we provide to those housing blocks, and sometimes that would be much larger proportions of the energy used because there's lots of communal lighting and things, plus there might be some communal boilers, whereas other places that have like individual boilers, obviously we can't measure the emissions associated with each of those individual flats. So it doesn't cover everything, but in terms of what we can directly influence, it incorporates all of those emissions. And then obviously we're looking at a more nuanced way of accounting for those emissions, and can we, for the purposes of our Scope 3 emissions, which is kind of our indirect emissions for people who don't know what Scope 1, 2, and 3 is. For our Scope 3, we're looking at how we can calculate those and what sort of proxies we might be able to use to say, well, actually, yes, this block of flats this is directly us. This is the gas that we supply. This is the electricity that we supply. But we know that on top of that, we have, say, 20 blocks of 20 flats, and each of them have individual boilers. And we estimate that each of those is, X kilowatt hours of energy per year, and that equates to however many tons of CO2, and we can then account for that in our Scope 3 emissions. But that's obviously, as you know, really, really complicated to do when we're in the process of working out what sort of proxies to use around that.
Great. So thank you for that. We've got Debbie. Is your hand up again, Debbie, or is that from the first time?
No, it's up again. It was just a very quick one. I think it's just to say, if you have a heat pump fitted, do you have to have a hot water cylinder? Because at the moment mine's heat on demand.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, because it's doing that heating, it's doing both sides of the heating for you, space heating and hot water. And because it can't be so instantaneous like a gas boiler, the reason our gas boilers are so large, you think about it, a gas boilers are 24, 30 kilowatts. Yeah, if you count all the radiators, you've probably got about 14 kilowatts of space heating demand. It's because they need that power to give you instantaneous hot water. Heat pumps can't do that. So you have to have a tank. And these tanks, if you've got a decent sized house, you'll probably have something like a 250 litre tank, which might be about 2 meters by about 600 diameter. So you need to find space for that, and the upheaval of how you get the pipes from one space to another space and all those kind of things. So there's a lot of consideration. This is why this hybrid solution is kind of easier, in that you've still got the instantaneous hot water because the boiler's doing that. So it does get rid of that particular issue. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so if I got a combined one, I wouldn't need a water tank. I don't have any space for a water tank. Yeah,
so then this solution, this hybrid solution, would work for you in that scenario. It is a way of solving some of those issues. Annalise was asking about the hybrid and the RHI. Yeah, you get the RHI on the space heating that you do from the heat pump. So it's a weird calculation that I won't go into now, because it's obviously all going to change by March. So, but we don't know how they will review hybrids under the Clean Homes grant yet. We're still waiting for that. And then Fiona has said, I would have expected for communal heating systems, communal PV systems to serve. I mean, yeah, the only issue with the communal PV systems historically is that councils have put them onto a block of flats and then fed them into the communal area. So all it's doing is really feeding the lighting. And you think, well, if it's sunny, why are the lights on? So much better to find solutions where we can actually have the energy going into the whole building and people doing it that way. So one way of doing that is everyone has a couple of panels each. Another way of doing that is, and I've gone through Ofgem on this for permission, and it kind of works, is you have a 30 kilowatt system, for instance, and let's say you got 30 flat, or let's say you got 20 flats, and the building uses 20,000 kilowatt hours. You'll get assigned 1,000 kilowatts. Sorry, 1,000 kilowatts of electricity per flat that come from the roof, and then the rest gets exported on export tariff. And that's kind of a way of dealing with that scenario. The communal heating side, or sort of district heating, it is much more complex. I mean, it's going to be difficult, And I think we'll end up with probably much more likely a couple of large air source heat pumps that will feed a building in London rather than the ground array stuff, because it's just so expensive. Unless councils are going to take an 80-year view on these ground arrays and say, okay, but then over time it will be a whole lot cheaper to replace the heat pumps, because replacing a small ground source heat pump in your flats is relatively cheap compared with replacing a couple of big air source heat pumps. Sure, but equally that's more kit in people's relatively small London flats compared with an air source heat pump. So I think we'll find a way through what people want and don't want, in their flat. So there's a lot of scenarios. I've been speaking to some housing associations about having internal wall insulation, and people say, look, our flats are freezing, we want internal wall insulation. Sure, we've got this thing, it's called Matilda's blanket, and you lose around about 8 centimeters off your flat, and then people go, well, I don't want that, it's too much upheaval and I'll lose too much space. Then a week later they're back on the phone saying, my flat's still cold. There at the moment, it's tough. They're really tough solutions. We've seen technologies like a spray on resin that I've worked with before down in South Wales, that can, 0.5 millimeter of a clear resin can do the same amount as sort of 7-8 centimeters of mineral wool. Brilliant. I won't get technical, no. The issue with it is it's not building regs approved in the UK. It is in Italy, and it gets all sorts of tax breaks in Italy. But they don't know how to test it, because normally what they do is they take a massive, great meters worth of insulation panels and then do a hot box test and see how much heat comes out the other side. Well, you can't do a meter of this product because it's only 0.5 millimeter thick. So they'd have to invent a test, and that costs lots of money, and people don't have the money to do that. But we know that technology on the horizon. So sort of going back to Debbie, I'd almost say, live with a slightly more expensive heat pump for a while, because insulation, the technology is there. It just needs to get proved and approved, and then we'll all be spraying our houses relatively cheaply. Like when we did do those installs, it was £60 a square meter, compared with, say, 120 for exterior wall insulation. So it's half the cost. And the reality of that could come down to, I think, about 30 or 40. So, Annalise, you raise your hand.
Yeah, sorry. And I don't want to hog the conversation. So if other people do want to ask questions, please shout up. I'm thinking, if I'm someone who, I don't know, Debbie or whoever else on this call, is someone who's thinking about a heat pump but not sure whether to go down this hybrid route, or whether there might be something that's a full heat pump, or that I might want to put into my property, but I don't have the money at the moment, but I might have money in a couple of years' time, and I'm looking at just making my house look a little bit better and maybe changing some of the radiators or something like that. Are there things that I can do at the moment where, say, if I'm changing a radiator, is there some stuff that I should be bearing in mind if I think, oh, well, in 2 years' time, I might want a heat pump? So actually, should I be thinking, oh, well, I should get my radiators a different size now? Or should I be getting underfloor heating now? Or should I wait until that 2-year point when
I would wait? I mean, I think the thing to think about is, let's say your oven kills over and dies, like ours did recently. I got a new range with an induction hob on it, because I know within the next 6 months to a year we're probably going to put a heat pump in. And what I didn't want to be doing was paying £92 a year for my standing order for my gas contract, just for my gas hob. So you can kind of think about things like that and say, well, I know if I want gas out of my property completely, I'm going to have to do something about my cooking as well as my heating. So you can think about things like that. The rest of it, I'd say no, because you're going to have to get the right size radiator. Now, if you've got a really cold room and you're not comfortable with it now, clearly you're going to need a bigger radiator, but you're going to need a much bigger radiator when you're running at 45, 50 degrees than when you're running at, say, 60, 65 degrees. So I would wait and have those heat loss calcs done first to know what you would need if for when it comes to having a heat pump. So there's not a lot you can do really beforehand. I say just probably thinking about the cookers is the only thing I'd suggest.
Yeah, so actually getting those kind of calculations done and just the assessment of what you might potentially have, thinking about what budget you might have in, say, a year's time or a couple of years' time, and doing the simple things like insulating the roof if it's not already insulated. Some of the stuff that you might focus on right now.
Yes, and because they're the things that are going to save you money anyway. If you're losing 25% through your roof and you've got really minimal loft insulation, put it in. It's only cost you a few £100. You'll probably get that back in 2 or 3 years with current, the way prices are going. And my sort of my take on the gas market is it looks fairly terrifying. Just some of the stats: we get 25% of our gas from the Russian pipeline. Horrible thought with Putin in charge. 20% we get from LNG cargoes. So our gas is politically really, really vulnerable, because that 20%, we're now competing with China, Japan, Korea, Australia, who are all decarbonising. Now, we're decarbonising at the moment really from gas to wind and solar. They're decarbonising from coal to gas. So they're much more likely to pay up for a gas cargo than we are. In the middle of this crisis, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, China put out a note saying, we want 8 LNG cargoes at any price. We can't make those decisions. It doesn't work for us. And so this price cap thing, we've killed off. We're going to end up killing off probably about 50 of the 70 utilities, I think, in this process. The ones that have not fallen yet will fall probably in the next couple of months, and we'll end up with a hardcore. Maybe even less. It may be 10, 15 rather than 20 companies that survive this. But they're going to put a lot more pressure on the government to say, well, we can't have this cap again because, we'll be the next company, then you'll have no utility supplying anything. So in a way, this is just kind of washed out the weak ones, fair enough. But if you think about that, next time it's cold again, and we know with climate change, we're going to get a lot more shocks to our system. So we will get really cold winters increasingly. And when China needs it, China needs it. So, and China will have air quality concerns. So actually, we've got to shut these coal plants now because the air quality is so bad. Okay, if we're shutting the coal plants, we're going to have to open the gas plant and we'll have to get gas in. So there's going to be a lot more shocks to the system. I'm sure they'll, at some stage, terrorists will work out that actually by attacking the ports in Qatar, they have a huge impact on the global economy because we're all reliant on these cargoes coming out of Qatar every single day. So, that geopolitics of it being reliant on Russia and the Middle East is really, really risky as well. So the quicker that we can migrate out of gas into heat pumps, and one of the things we haven't discussed today is hydrogen. And hydrogen is just really, really expensive, and it also needs more energy. For every kilowatt of energy you put in, you get 0.7 kilowatts of energy out from the hydrogen. Where's that energy going to come from? What we've got to remember here, right, is that 25% of our energy is electricity that we consume in our homes. The rest of it, 75 to 80%, is gas heating demand. Now, if you go for a 1-for-1 system, then we've got to find 5 times the generation that we have today to provide that heat via hydrogen, because we've got to make the hydrogen first from electricity. Now, yes, we insulate our homes and stuff, our demand goes down, but at least with the heat pump, it's 325% efficient. So, that 4 times factor drops down to a 1.2 times, 1.3 times factor that we've got to find. That's a whole lot easier. So when people talk about, oh, well, just have hydrogen, we won't. It's just never going to work. And Wood Mackenzie think that it will be at the same price as gas by 2040. Well, by 2040, heat pumps will be a fraction of the cost they are today, and their efficiencies will probably be from 300% up to 500%. Then you've got an issue that the amount of pollution that comes from making this hydrogen, even green hydrogen, has a carbon footprint to it because it's fairly intensive energy to create it. Well, it's never going to compete. If we're 500% efficient on a grid that's 100, for instance, let's say our grid, our target 2030 is 100. So 100 grams per kilowatt hour, 100 milligrams per kilowatt hour is the current target. Well, if we're 500% efficient, then our heat pumps are going to be 20. but our hydrogen's going to be 130 because it needs, you know, only produce 0.74 of that. So then you're going to be saying, well, this is the dirty gas now. Hydrogen will be the dirty gas because it'll be a lot cleaner to heat your homes with heat pumps. And people don't seem to have thought about that argument as well. I've not seen that anywhere yet. I keep quoting it in sessions like this, but it's just a reality. Is, you know, something takes a 1 to 2 to produce it, and yet actually you can produce heat at 3 or 4 or 5 to 1. Clearly, it's going to be a lot cleaner to use it at the 3 or 4, 5 to 1. So heat pumps are the way forward, and it's just working out how to do it. And the insulation side will have to come. Yeah, and it's going to need central government. I mean, you can't blame the councils for this. You know, they've got no bloody money. You know, the government's going to have to put its hand in its pocket and work out that actually, if we insulate these homes, our NHS bills will go down. Yeah, we're basically socially prescribing there. We'll have to do a whole lot less of upgrading of the grids. You know, so there'll be money saved there, and so on and so forth. You know, less transportation costs, less this, less that, and they've got to look at it in the round. Really, they can't just look at this one thing, say, oh my goodness, you know, we can't spend £10,000 insulating everybody's home. That's not the cost. I mean, there's a really good case of social prescribing in the northeast. So Annalise will like this one, which was, I think it was Sunderland Council, and they basically put new gas boilers into people with pulmonary diseases homes. And prior to that, these people were spending 7 visits on average a year over winter, and their average stay was 2 weeks, right? So you're looking at 14 weeks these people are in hospital, and just on hospital beds, yeah, that's £500 a day, you know, and so it goes on. And you looked at the cost list, and it was like tens of thousands of pounds. The heat pump paid back in about, you know, the boiler paid back in about a month of the heating season, because what they found was that these people were then only going into hospital for 2 weeks of the winter rather than 14 weeks of the winter. So the NHS pay for those boilers because it's much cheaper for them. Now we need to start looking at those kind of sensible calcs. You know, how much, you know, I've seen quotes that it's going to cost 70-80 billion to upgrade the grid. That's just to make the grid smarter. That's not to be able to handle all this additional heat. That's going to cost even more. Okay, right. So how can we deal with this then? Insulate the home so we don't have to heat them. I was on a call with Merton Council last week with Sustainable Merton, who are a lovely group, and they were doing a COP thing. And we got into the debate. This guy has built this brilliantly house that he's used SIP blocks, and he's got a grass roof. He's got solar PV on the roof and all this kind of stuff. And he put a heat pump in. It cost him £15,000. And I asked the question, you know, was it worth putting the heat pump in? Could you not have just had one-to-one heating? He said, well, the reality is, you know, the amount we're spending on it, probably not. It would have been cheaper. It would have been a lot better just to have, I don't know, you know, storage heaters or something like that. He said, because even when it was really, really cold last February, he said, we put the heating on for 2 hours in the morning, and that was it. We turned it off, and the house stayed the same temperature, even when it was like -4, -5. So then, so you kind of start thinking about, okay, well, we're spending all this money on heat pumps. Would we be better massively retrofitting our houses with insulation? And it's a debate to have. You know, at the moment, we're not incentivized to. We're incentivized to put heat pumps in because the government gives you up to £12,000 for a heat pump. It's giving you nothing really, Green Homes grants, but that's now gone, towards your insulation, which might cost £10,000. It costs a similar amount, but you don't get the same subsidy. So at the moment, you know, we're probably getting the wrong incentives. But we have to go with those incentives. Get your heat pump, and at some stage, I'm sure they will do something about the insulation element, and then you kind of double dip and get both things paid for by the government at some stage. But it just needs to be a much broader thought than you know our current butterfly government is ever going to get to, really. Because it needs,
yeah, and that kind of picks up nicely with what someone's actually just put in the chat around there being kind of a resistance to this large capital outlay for domestic heat pumps, which is totally understandable, particularly in Wandsworth, where obviously a lot of people live in flats for short periods of time. So at the moment, if you would benefit from like the renewable heat incentive, you would get payments, but they're payments over the period of 7 years. And in 7 years' time, you might have thought, well, I will have moved twice in that period of time. So I can see why the shift that they're proposing with the clean heat grant and giving you money up front, even though the total amount of money you get is less, is a bit of that's a nice cushion to have if you need to spend that money up front. But of course, as you said before, we don't know exactly what the criteria is going to be that's going to come alongside those grants and how many it's going to pay for example. But I think that seems to be something that all organisations and national government and individuals struggle with, is money up front for savings that are made kind of several years down the line. And that's why they're having those kind of calculations that you were talking about earlier. I think it's really important because it gives you a sort of calculation on paper to show you over time why something is more expensive than something else, why holding onto your boiler for an extra 10 years might not be the best thing.
Yeah, agreed. And I think they've probably got that number wrong. I think they're thinking, oh, heat pumps cost 10,000, so in a couple of years they'll only cost 8,000. Therefore, if you need a new gas boiler, it's 3,000. We're giving you 5. It's the same number. That was their thinking. But when I talk to people, the guy who put his Mitsubishi Eco down in, he paid 15,000 for it, because you need, the complexity of the installs. The reality is, you will have an engineer there or 2 engineers there for 5 days. A gas boiler doesn't have that. A guy comes in, he puts it, because what they're having to do is they're not just putting the heat pump in. That's part of the cost, but the other part is they're decommissioning a gas boiler. They're having to cap that system off. They're having to take out maybe an old hot water tank. They're having to put a new pressurized tank in. There's a lot of work here, and that doesn't go away. And those things aren't going to get cheaper. Those 2 people doing the installs for say 4 or 5 days, they're not going to be cheaper in 2 years' time. The heat pumps might be, and the heat pumps are ridiculous. Some of these heat pumps cost like £7,000, and you think, well, I can buy a fridge for 250 quid, and it's the same technology. So why is this £7,000? So that's the bit where there is movement, I think, but it's movement to get us maybe down below 10, but not down to 7 or 8 that then compares with gas boilers. So I think the government has a lot to do and a lot to think about. They're doing something at the moment. There's something called Heat Pump Ready. They've got about 20-30 million, and it's how can we reduce running costs? How can we make installs get over the inertia of installs, make installs quicker, easier, less impactful on the house. And we're going to be working with Hydromix on that, because you won't have to upgrade so many radiators if we can produce more heat in the room. So they're looking at these things, and a big part of that cash is going to phase 1, which is, okay, we want to work with heat pump installers and heat pump manufacturers. Say, these heat pumps are too big, they're too noisy, they're too this, it takes too long to do an install. What can we do to make that better? And we'll see what comes out of those studies. But it's only 6% of the money, so people have still got to find 40% of the money. So it's not, even that's not that easy. So now I'm really sorry, but I somehow crazily booked this on the same day as my partner's birthday, and we meant to be out to dinner at 7. So I'm really going to have to go, if that's okay. But I hope it was useful. And there will be the recording made available if people missed it, I think, right, on the website. So I'll forward that to you guys tomorrow. But yeah, if you've got any questions, you can come to Crew's site, crewenergy.london, and drop us a note, or info@crewenergy.london is our email address, and we will see how we can help you. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Hope it's helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. See you all.